Welcome. I am your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. Joined by an old friend of the show. We got my guy, John Stargaryen. You guys can follow him at MMA Fox. That's FAWKES on Twitter. And we are here propping you up for UFC 275, headlined by two title fights. We got the light heavyweight title in the main event with Glover Teixeira trying to successfully defend his title for the first time, going up against dynamic striker Yuri Prochazka. And Prochazka, obviously, minus 200 favorite here. Can't wait to hear John's thoughts on that once we get to the main event. And then obviously co-main event, flyweight strap on the line for the women's. We got Valentina Shevchenko coming in as a minus 630 favorite, going up against Tyler Santos coming in around plus 400. I think it's Val's toughest test since she fought Ioana and Jacek. I can't wait to hear what John has to say about it as well. Quick, addressing the elephant in the room here. Obviously, Cody was scheduled to do the show today. Unfortunately, he's dealing with a personal matter. I don't think he'd be mad if I said anything about it, but he's going to have to put down one of his dogs in the next day or two, and he's very bummed about it. Now that I got Alfred for like the past 2 or 3 years, I completely understand how that could devastate somebody. And given that he's had that dog for over 18 years now, going to be a tough one for him. So I told him to take as much time as he wants. I know, very old dog. I told him to take as much time as he wants. And hopefully we can get back to it next week or the week after. But so that's where Cody is. But luckily, I got my trusty guy, John, who's always willing to take the call and answer the call and come on and drop some props for you guys. And it's for a big one, John. It's UFC 275. So first and foremost, how's everything been? And what are your thoughts about this upcoming card, my brother?
Yeah. I mean, everything's been good. I wish betting had been going a little better. Fortunately, still holding a slight profit on the year, but the last month's been a bit rough. JJ Aldrich last week, pretty painful. Zalgas as well. Yeah. So things could be better in that regard, but I feel pretty good about this card, to be honest. I think there's a couple decent spots here. Both the main and co-main are interesting for various reasons. It's kind of weird because I think we're a little light on name value here, but I mean there's some real potential for bangers like early in the card and then potentially later in the card. Though I think some of those fights could go a couple different ways.
Yeah, like you said, not a lot of name value on the card, but if you know, right? Like as Dana says, if you know, now you know essentially, right? There's a lot of guys on here that bring the heat. There's a lot of guys that bring entertainment, and I can't wait to break it down, but I can't wait to watch it either. I was hoping, since it's a Singapore card, that it would be an early card. But no, Here we are. It's going to be regular time over here. It's going to be nice and early over there in Singapore Sunday morning. I believe it's 12 hours ahead of Eastern time. So,
yeah, and unfortunately,
you were gonna say
my wife booked plans for us with some friends on Saturday night, so I'm gonna try to catch what I can of the card, but it's really I'm devastated. And she gave me when I tried to kind of imply that maybe we shouldn't do anything Saturday, I got a helping of shit for that. So yeah, I'm gonna try to catch what I can, but we'll see. The iPhone will be under the table. That's all I can say.
Luckily for me, yeah. Luckily for me, this is the only week.
Lock, you're cutting in and out a bit, buddy.
Where I don't have anything. So we're back. Yeah, no. Next.
Hold on, guys. Sorry, I think we're having a couple technical difficulties.
We got after that got more weddings, friends, and all that stuff. So
yeah, guys, just hold on. Give it 2 seconds. I think he's going to take care of it in a second. But yeah, I mean, it is an interesting card top to bottom here. I actually think most of the betting value on this card is kind of mostly removed from the main card. I mean, there's a couple fights on there that are interesting, but I kind of think the co-main and the main, obviously we'll get into it when he gets back in here, but I think there's some reaching going on in both spots, and I'm not going to jump too much into it right now. I think from an entertainment perspective, though, I mean, the Steve Garcia Mahashate fight is probably, if Steve Garcia's chin can hold up, is on the table for like one of the best fights we've had booked of the year. Neither guy has much defense. Both guys are going to swing to death in there. It should be pretty exciting. Guys, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them right now. We wait for Manpreet. I don't really want to dive into the show until he's back in here, so let me know. All right. Well, I will. With that being said, let's let's jump ahead. I'll just briefly kind of talk about the next card, PFL this week. What I think is interesting there. I don't. I know we're talking UFC 275 here. What's my most confident bet this weekend? Okay, there we go. I like Ramazan Emeev a lot here, to be completely honest. Uh, I get the love behind Jack Della Maddalena. You know, Obviously, I think the kind of narrative and the reality has been in his first two fights on contenders in the UFC is he's an elite volume guy, and he has been that. But I kind of think people overstate the meaningfulness of putting a volume against a guy like Angelusa. When you watch when you watch Lusa, he gave up 150 significant strikes to Munir Lazez in his last fight. Lazez is decent, but he's nothing special, and so yeah, how much value can I put into that? Not much. Pete Rodriguez is a guy who's 4-0, who's only fought cans, meaningless gym, came in on short notice. Not really that meaningful either. And so while they were impressive performances, what we did get from those fights, in particular the Lusa fight, was Jack Della Maddalena showed he can be put in pretty compromising positions on the mat. He doesn't really have a traditional get-up game. And if you actually go back to his Australian regional tape, you see he got taken down a number of times by quite poor grapplers. And his general methodology for getting up isn't really your standard, try to get to your back or get to the fence, grab an overhook and work up. It's I'm going to isolate an arm and attempt an arm bar or go for a triangle and get up. That works at a low level against poor grapplers. It doesn't really tend to work as you go up the ranks in the UFC. And, additionally, Della is, I believe he's a blue belt. He might be a purple belt now. But again, you're not talking about a high level jiu-jitsu guy. And if you actually watch the grappling exchanges in the Lusa fight, he focuses on isolating that arm and gets himself one time put in a deep triangle, which he managed to power out of, which one isn't that likely to happen in the UFC. It's just not easy to do that. And then the next time he ended up on his back, he did the same thing, and he almost got stuck in an arm triangle again. But with that said, I think he's a decent prospect. Look, he obviously throws a ton of volume if you let him. But Emeev on the other side, volume, obviously he's the polar opposite, is kind of a concern for the Emeev side of things. He only lands, I believe it's about 2.5 strikes a minute. And so you see in just about every one of his fights, he ends up in relatively close fights. But something to note with that, he actually minimizes striking exchanges quite well. He only absorbs 2 strikes a minute back. He tends to have a style that, like, he's not going to do what Pete Rodriguez and Lusa did. He isn't a guy who's going to brawl it out in the pocket with you. He's going to play the outside game and try to pick his shots. And if you do pressure him aggressively, he's going to change levels. And so, given how easy Jack's let guys in on his hips thus far in the UFC, I expect Emeev should be able to get a number of takedowns here, probably 3 or 4. I think that's fairly likely. And so the question then becomes, can he control him? Emeev's not the best control wrestler, but he's not awful either. And I think something a lot of people overlook when they talk about control wrestling is, guys don't control UFC level competition, but when they fight worse grapplers, they tend to. And so I'm not entirely convinced that Emeev is going to have the issues controlling Jack that he did controlling David Zawada and Danny Roberts. And by the way, people say he struggled to control them. He got about a round of control time in each of those fights. And so if he ends up with a minute and a half to 2 minutes of control per round and is able to significantly minimize exchanges, I mean, worst case scenario, it's a close fight. If the takedowns are coming at the end of the round, we know how judges value the end. They're probably going to favor him. I guess ultimately, I just think it's a fairly close fight, but unless Jack just knocks him out, I don't really see a scenario where Jack wins this fight dominantly. Whereas on the other side, if you told me Amid can get him down, get on top, and just grind him there and get like 10, 11 minutes of control, it really wouldn't surprise me. So, like, I think Amid should be a small favorite here. I don't really get him being a dog. So he's my most confident play. Um, Anybody else? Any other questions here? Yeah, other bets that I have, and obviously we'll go through it. I've also bet Jake Matthews on the money line here. I think it's a pretty good spot. I have him at plus 135. MPTV says he will be gassed by the third round. He could be, but if you watch the elusive fight, Jack looked pretty gassed late in the fight. All right, Manpreet wants me to start the first fight. I'm going to jump into the first fight then. All right, guys. So, it is unfortunate that I'm going to be fairly busy on Saturday night, but I can tell you this: I don't really mind missing the first two fights of this card. First fight of the night, we got Jocelyn Edwards. She's taken on Ramona Pasquale. This is an ugly one. You guys might remember Ramona Pasquale debuted a couple months ago. Short notice, she took on Josiane Nunes. Regrettably, I think I bet her on fight night near plus 300. Just basic thinking was I don't really rate much about Nunes' game. I think she's a poor grappler, and Pasquale's a big woman who attempts many takedowns. Obviously that didn't work out. She did get takedowns, but she struggled badly to assert herself. And on the feet, she was just a punching bag. People might attribute that to it being short notice and whatnot. But the reality is, I think there's only so much you can attribute to short notice. Things like defense, head movement, keeping a high guard. Those are things that those don't go away in a short notice fight. Cardio can, but something where you're getting teed off on the feet, not really. In terms of the grappling, look, I think that's the clearest path of this fight for Ramona here. Obviously, I think the lasting impression in the minds or in everyone's minds about Jocelyn Edwards is her getting controlled by both Carol Hosa and Jessica Rose Clark. I don't particularly rate Jessica Rose Clark's wrestling, but it's okay. And Jessica Rose Clark is very, very experienced, and so I think there's a lot of belief here that Pasquale can just get her down and dominate there. And I can't say that I'd be overly shocked if Ramona was able to do that. And as MPTV touched on in the chat, Ramona is bigger. Jocelyn is coming up a weight class here. But seeing how much Pasquale struggled to close distance against Josiane Nunes, I'm not really convinced she's going to have a much better time here. Like, I know Nunes hits hard and she'll throw like big with wild combos, but she's not really much of a manager of distance. Like, she isn't someone that even a slightly below average UFC grappler should have that much trouble with. And Pasquale struggled mightily to close distance against her. So I'm not really completely buying that she's just going to come out here and maul Edwards. On the feet, I think it's pretty much one-way traffic on the Edwards side of things. Pasquale can maybe land some shots here or there, but Edwards has much more reliable volume. She hits harder. She's the more technical striker. But all this is to say, it's kind of a mess of a fight. I guess for me, the big, I could not lay an Edwards money line here just because, Edwards has shown those issues off her back, and Pasquale could get takedowns here. But what I think is interesting, from a prop perspective, fight doesn't go to distance is like plus 150. And I know that's kind of, it's always dicey to take a prop like that in a female fight, but we've seen Edwards knock out women on the regional scene. She obviously loves to attempt arm bars and attempt submissions off her back. Personally, I hate that when I'm trying to bet on somebody. But if you're trying to bet on somebody or you're trying to bet on it doesn't go the distance line, you want people who are going to like instigate a finish in the fight. And Edwards is the kind of fighter that, will try to do that. We know Ramona on the feet is very, very open. On top of which, you look at Pasquale, who is the bigger fighter here, she probably hits a tad harder. She might have some finishing upside if she can completely dominate on the ground. She has a number of finishes regionally, and to me, it's like this is a mess of a low level fight where neither fighter has much defense. Yeah, I think the under. I think the under, and I think fight doesn't go are interesting angles. With that said, moving on here though, we have another fairly low level fight. This one I expect to be quite a bit more exciting. We have Silvana Gomez Juarez. She's coming off of one of the most hilarious armbar losses in recent UFC history to Vanessa Demopoulos. All right, we got Manpreet back.
I
What's
am
going on,
back.
man?
Thank you for holding it down. I have no idea what happened with my internet just now, but good God, was I stressing the fuck out. I'm like, oh my phone was getting Wi-Fi, but yeah, my internet, good God, thank God, my laptop.
Oh, you're cutting out again. All right. Hold on.
God, don't tell me that.
Don't worry, guys. I'm gonna let it cut for a second, and then I'll pick back up. Reddick, that I don't mean she hits harder, but I'm saying like Pasquale is a big woman who probably does crack, and we haven't seen Jocelyn face that level of power yet in the UFC. With respect to this fight, obviously Na Liang, I don't really particularly rate her, but she's one of the more exciting female fighters you'll ever come across. I believe she's 19-5, and something like I think it's something like 12 or 13 of her wins have come in the first round. She basically, I mean, honestly, you guys hear me? All right, we both back.
Well, I'm using my phone now. How does it sound?
A little better. You got to be a little closer.
Get a little closer.
No, you're good. You're good.
Hold on. Let me see if I can make this sideways. Will that help? That is not going to help at all. This is horrible. I apologize for all this shit, guys. Honestly, I'm not sure what's going on with my internet.
You're really
how does
low
that
right
sound?
Now it's better.
Okay, that's better. I'm just gonna put up my phone right beside my laptop so that I can do what I need to do. Look, this is crazy, dude.
You're like cutting in and out of Tad. Do you have AirPods?
Yeah, you know what? Let me get my AirPods. 1 second.
Okay, cool. Locke's getting his AirPods. I'll just continue with what I was saying about this fight. Yeah, I mean, basically, Na Liang is kind of a one-rounder bust. She comes out 100 miles an hour. She tends to empty the gas tank and either get a finish or typically, she's lost a couple decisions, but typically get finished if she doesn't. And I don't see that being any different here. I think with Liang, it's like she's a decent grappler, but I don't think she's positionally very sound. She hits reasonably hard, but again, I don't think she is defensively sound on the feet. But she's the kind of fighter that's going to steer into chaos. I mean, just for proof, you have an over 1.5 here, which is just completely fucking nuts. Over 1.5, which is overs at -125. And I don't see it being much different in this fight. I think, with Gomez Juarez, you look at her fights in the UFC so far. Obviously, she debuted with Lupe Godinez, rough fight, got ragdolled in the grappling, got finished, got submitted. And then last fight, she dropped Demopoulos hard, went into her guard, and got armbarred. And so obviously, her submission defense is a concern. Her wrestling in general is a concern. And I would expect, in this fight that Liang should have significant success early in this fight. I'd be a little surprised if she doesn't. But with that said, we know Liang for a fact is going to come out 100 miles an hour here. We know Juarez is a much better striker and far more dangerous on the feet. Like I think she has like reasonable KO upside, and There are some things about the Carnelossi fight that give me pause here for the Yang side. In particular, I bet Lupi against Carnelossi primarily because of that fight. But and look, I expected Lupi to win that fight fairly easily, but I didn't expect it to be as dominant as that. And some of the positions Carnelossi was able to weasel out of just make me think Liang's control game isn't that good. And if that's the case, it's like I know there's questions about how UFC level Juarez is here, but if she is UFC level, how likely can you really say Liang is to sub her early in this fight? Can you really say it's higher than like 30%? Like that seems extreme to me. And if you can't say Liang's going to sub her early, it's very, very tough for me to see Liang winning this fight. Like I can imagine her winning a decision where she's gassed out, but I can't. I still think if it goes past one round, it favors Juarez here. In terms of props, honestly, this is going to sound crazy because of Liang's history, but I actually like the over 1.5 here. It's possible she subs Juarez, but like I said, I can't rate an armbar finish around 50%, and nor can I rate a women's KO finish in the first round very highly. John Martian posted this or said this on his podcast, but there's been something like 180 instances of women having over 1.5 rounds being live there. And if you bet the under there, you have like a minus 11% ROI. It just doesn't happen very often. So I kind of like the over. And honestly, I think both women could potentially gas out here. And so I kind of like goes the distance at plus 200. Locke, what do you think?
First of all, ask this question.
Little, like, I think you could come in a bit.
Sorry?
Oh, now you're good.
Am I good?
Mm-hmm.
I have my headset set up, but I can't get my audio to my headset, but I'm hoping that at least it's my mic.
There you go. Now you're good.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect right there.
Okay. So let me just give my quick thoughts on that because I thought you really broke it down pretty well. Obviously, Ramona, we tried making her Ramona Madoff in her last fight against who's the last?
Josiane Nunes.
Josiane Nunes. Yeah, exactly. She did land some takedowns there. Didn't really have the best success in that spot, but I think that was really more active on the feet. Takedown defense sucks, but I think that she is offensive. She should be able to busy her moments in time where look. Oh my God!
Yeah, you're cutting it out a bit here. You might want to just move it closer to you.
John, continue on with Juarez, and then I will. Let me try to remedy this one more time.
So you want me to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right, guys. So with that being the case, we move on. We got Kyung-Ho Kang. He's taking on Dana Bakuri. Cool fight. Kind of weird. There's not many props out for this yet. I don't really understand it. I don't know. It's very surprising there aren't many props out for it. But anyway, obviously Dana Bakuri is coming off getting spinning elbowed and put out against Chris Gutierrez. Kang coming off a fairly crazy fight with Hani Yahya that he lost in a close decision. I think it's an interesting fight on a number of levels here because I think as a prospect, I think most would say Dana is has a substantially higher ceiling than Kang, and I can't really disagree with that. Obviously, when you have a fighter with Dana's finishing capabilities, at 135 pounds, that's pretty rare. He also throws pretty good volume. He's fairly big. He's explosive. Those are all great characteristics for a prospect. But I do think he has some holes. Namely, I don't really love his approach to striking. He doesn't throw many kicks. He tends to fire, very, very wide hooks. And you saw in, the Gutierrez fight, he had a very easy time for most of that fight making reads on, what Bakuri was going to do. But with that said, look, I mean, Dana is very, very explosive, and he will put out volume, and that's going to be enough against a lot of guys in the lower level. Kang, not really lower level, but he's kind of interesting in his own right. He's someone I thought about betting here. I just don't think he's urgent enough. Kang's not a bad striker. He's fairly fundamental. He's got a good jab. He has decent boxing. He will throw kicks. Obviously, he's known for his wrestling. My problem with Kang is it's just, first of all, his cardio, I think, is starting to get a little suspect. And I suspect that's why he doesn't attempt a high volume of takedowns, because if he did, I'd have some interest here. But the truth is, it's hard to rely on Kang to attempt more than 3 to 5 takedowns across 15 minutes, which kind of plays into the Bakuri side a bit, because it's weird because I don't have the best read on Danaz's wrestling. He's only really fought Alatang as a wrestler. And obviously, Alatang got him down 3 times, got 3 minutes of control. But he did not do the best job controlling him. The big concern for me with that fight was Danaz's willingness to throw strikes off his back. But that also might have just been a product of it being fairly late in the fight. And so I don't have the best read there. But, he's an improving fighter. He's very athletic. And so it's possible he can work up here. But with that said, Kang is obviously a different level than Alatang when it comes to top control. And so I think Kang has the components to win this fight. The problem is he's a low volume striker, whereas Dana is fairly high volume. And he's he's a wrestler, but he's a fairly low volume wrestler, which means, if Dana can stuff 3 or 4 takedowns here, it should really be his fight to lose. So I don't really love a side on the money line. What I will say is Danaz my lean, and I think like minus 140-ish is right. But again, kind of similar to what I said about the Amit fight earlier, I think the only guy with really dominant upside here in a decision is Kang, just because if it does turn out he shoots proactively or he can get the takedowns relatively easily, he might actually just be able to grind him out for 8 to 10 minutes. And so I don't know. I kind of like I leaned not to win, but I think there is more scope for Kang looking aside here. I guess from a prop perspective, it's kind of interesting. I guess there's really like nothing out, to be honest. All I'm seeing is Bakuri lines. I think taking a pop at Bakuri winning inside the distance is maybe worthwhile at plus 175. I don't really love it, but Brandon Davis did hurt Kang, if I recall correctly. So I don't know. That's interesting. But yeah, I mean, I lean the knob, but I don't really think there's no interest on my end anyway in betting this fight. The next fight, though, I do actually have a fair amount of interest in betting, and I have bet it. We have Jake Matthews, the Celtic Kid. He's taking on Andre Fiallo. Fiallo's making his third fight in about 3 months here. He's looked reasonably okay, I guess. It's kind of weird because Fiallo's a guy, he might just be someone that I end up just donating money on until he actually proves to me that he's more than just a round 1 knockout artist, to be honest. We saw him have a very good round 1 in his debut against Michel Pereira, but then drop his gas tank very quickly, albeit on short notice, but get dominated really the last 2 rounds of that fight. And I could forgive that if that was the only instance, but if you actually go through Fiallo's regional footage, there are many, many instances of him gassing out past the first round. So I feel pretty comfortable until I see him actually be able to push a pace past 4 minutes. I feel pretty comfortable saying that he likely has a very poor gas tank. In terms of his game, it's obviously very boxing heavy. He integrated some kicks in his last couple fights, but still, it mostly leans on his boxing. He wants to force the fight in the pocket and string together combinations. Obviously, he hits quite hard. I think the issues I have with him is I don't think, number one, that he cuts off the cage very well. Even watching the Baeza fight, it's obviously a very impressive win. But until Baeza kind of broke his nose and just kind of bit down the mouthpiece and got in the pocket with him, he was kind of hitting him at will from the outside. And that's kind of been the story of Fiallo's career. If you don't stand directly in front of him, he's fairly easy to get off on. Even the Vic fight, in XMMA, until he dinged Vic, he was getting just pretty much toyed with for about 7 minutes of that fight. And it's not something I think has been corrected that much. And even in the pocket, he's a very dangerous boxer in the pocket, no question. Obviously, has a great jab, strings together combos well, hits hard. But, the guy is very, very, very easy to hit. His last fight, Cameron Van Camp, that guy got brought in on short notice to do a job, if we're being honest. And Van Camp hurt him and was landing pretty much at will until he got knocked out. That's pretty disturbing for me, and it's while I've seen, some parts of Fialho's game evolve, like he is throwing more kicks now, that kind of just fits in with the rest of his tape throughout his career. And, in this fight with Jake Matthews, it's like, is he the better striker? From a technical standpoint, I'd say probably. If these guys go in the pocket there and trade in there, I would certainly favor Fialho in that kind of a fight. The thing is, Jake Matthews isn't really a guy that is going to ever go into the pocket, bite down on the mouthpiece, and trade with you. It's just not his game. He's going to hang out on the outside. He's going to try to dart in and out, land his jab, land a 1-2, and then get out of there. And, that kind of style has given Fialho a number of issues over the years. And while I do think, Fialho can have success, in particular in round one, I kind of think it's fairly close standing here. And like, I know people hate Jake Matthews and everybody considers him to be, so vanilla, but I kind of have this like feeling that that's because Matthews came in as a super touted prospect. And instead of being really, really good, he's just average. The guy has a good striking ratio. He's very good at getting in and out, as I mentioned. And while I have some questions about what happens when he has to wrestle somebody against the cage, he does do a very good job of hitting reactive takedowns. And that's something here that I think is a huge thing because Fialho is going to have to pressure. That's the reality. Matthews isn't going to come in the pocket. Fialho is going to have to pressure him. And I think it's going to open up some opportunities for Matthews to change levels. And the reality is Matthews is a pretty good grappler. He is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He has pretty good top control. And I do think if he gets on top of Fialho, he can likely have significant top time. And honestly, if it clears the first 6 minutes here and Fialho starts slowing, I could see him just wiping out Fialho on the mat. And so, again, it's the kind of fight where, like, I can understand the upside on Fialho. Obviously, he's the more dangerous striker. But I think it's the kind of fight where you have to favor Matthews outright here. In terms of props, I like Matthews by decision here. Matthews has cracked a couple guys in his career, but he's not, he's certainly not a knockout artist. Could he submit Fialho? Yeah, but I don't really love his jiu-jitsu despite him having a black belt. He has – would Jake Matthews beat Michel Pereira? No, I do not think Jake Matthews would beat Michel Pereira. There he is.
Testing. Do I sound like I'm a dubstep song?
You sound good right now.
Okay, sounds clear. Looks clear.
Yeah, we're good.
Jesus. Dude, in the 3 years I've been live streaming, this is the first time it's ever happened to me on stream. Like, I've had shitty internet connection, but you can still hear the audio. But to the point that everything just shuts the fuck down. That was, oh my God, my heart. It's one thing if it's on my channel. It's another thing if it's on the All-Star. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
All right. Before I get into what I missed out on, I do want to shout out the All-Star. I do want to shout out our sponsors as well before we keep going here. First of which is obviously betonline.ag. Make sure you guys go check them out. Probably the best for MMA betting, considering they usually drop the first lines and they usually have some of the best props out there. And not to mention the regional MMA. If you guys want to get your fix, if you wanted to bet on Road to UFC, 2 more episodes coming on tonight, that's where you guys are going to be able to do it. Make sure you guys check out betonline.ag. Link is in the description below. I believe they match your initial deposit up to 50%. 50% welcome bonus up to $1,000. So make sure you guys go check them out. Link is in the description below. Also, Cloudbet, which me and John are going to be talking about a little bit later on here because they've put together a lot of great props for this specific card. They always ask us for our input, and we try to give them something cool, something different. We got a Team China parlay boost for you guys as well, if you guys believe in all the Chinese fighters on this card as well. So, John, what fight are you on right now?
I'm talking Fialho and Jake Matthews at the moment.
Fialho and Jake Matthews. Okay, so let me just quickly give my best prop and best bet.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Block, are you there? All right. Well, it looks like we are again having technical difficulties. I will continue to take it away here. Yeah, so I like Matthews by decision. Like I said, Matthews could finish this fight, but
do you hear me?
You're cutting in and out. It's dubstep right now. Your face is frozen.
What the
Oh, I hear your voice now.
fuck?
Nope, cutting out. All right. Yeah. So I like Matthews by decision here. I just honestly, I could see him taking Fiallo's back, maybe finding a late sub, but honestly, I don't think Matthews' jiu-jitsu is that assertive. He doesn't go to a body triangle, which is like a huge bugaboo of mine because guys who know what they're doing can usually separate the legs fairly easily in MMA. So yeah, I think Fiallo by decision plus 240. If you can get plus 220, or not Fiallo, apologies, Jake Matthews by decision, it's a pretty good number. I honestly think decision is close to like a 50% outcome here. So there's like a lot of meat on that bone. And I like Matthews on the money line quite a bit. So with that said, we will move on to the next fight. We have a banger here. We got Teixeira Mahashate, absolute contenders legend. I believe he won on contenders as a plus 500. And yeah, I mean, it was a wild fight. He got rocked badly early in that fight and then ended up, bouncing back, coming back, winning the fight late. And he's taken on Steve Garcia, who was also coming off a wild fight where he was dropped 3 times in the first round and a half by Charlie Ontiveros. And that was a crazy fight, but eventually Garcia was able to get the takedowns, take over. In terms of this fight, I bet Garcia on the money line here. There are some real concerns with regard to how open Garcia is defensively, and I do share those concerns. And I think they're the same thing on the Mahashate side. I think Mahashate is actually a lot like Steve Garcia. They're both very big for lightweight. I know Garcia used to fight at lower weight classes, but the guy's 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. This is not a small lightweight. And he's taken on, another guy who's 6 feet tall and 73.5-inch reach. Tristan, I'm not the host, so I can't. Sorry, man. But yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting fight here. So these guys are both going to come out and brawl. That's kind of what they like to do. I do think, from a striking perspective, I think Garcia is a much more refined striker than Mahashate is. He may not be as durable as him, but again, I think people are taking too much out of the Ontiveros fight. Ontiveros was a welterweight who was coming down. He's a guy that's got a bunch of first-round finishes, and he cracked him and hurt him early. Like, I think that's fine. If you watch Garcia's tape, he's not a guy who's been getting hurt very frequently, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe he's ever been KO'd. And so with Mahashate, we don't really know. Maybe he is as durable as he looked on contenders, or maybe he just managed to hold on that one fight. And so on the feet, look, it could get really brawlish if they're standing here on the feet and trading. But honestly, I don't expect Garcia to take that path if he's intelligent. We saw him go to the grappling against Ontiveros. He's done it a few times regionally. And I know tape on Mahashate is fairly limited, but the one time we have seen him get grappled, he got absolutely mauled. And I don't want to generalize things, but outside of Aori Kulang, most of the guys who have come over from the China PI just haven't really shown any acumen for grappling. And, that's what the tape shows in Mahashate. Could he have gotten better? Yeah. But I have to trust what I see. And I kind of think there is a very, very, very clear path for victory for Garcia here if he can hit takedowns. But again, even striking, I favor Garcia in the striking. I think he's a cleaner striker, but obviously that's steering into variance. In terms of props, I like the fight doesn't go at -2. I see BetOnline's got -200. There's -220s out there. And, additionally, I kind of like Garcia inside the distance at like +120, 45% for a guy who's going to be in a crazy high volume fight here. I think you have to be on it. Locke, how are you doing?
This is my last attempt. I am using
data slow motion
and using my phone. Can you hear?
Not really.
Okay, I'm giving up.
But now you're better.
How about now? Is this better?
A lot better.
Okay, you know what? Fuck the how it looks. You guys are just gonna have to deal with my face this up close and personal. If at any point, John, that I am trying to cut out, let me know. But as of right now, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize so much, guys.
You're cutting out a bit now.
Sorry?
You're cutting out a bit now.
Okay, you know what? You just take over the show, and I'm going to Twitter DM you my favorite plays, and I'm going to watch the show for the background.
All right, works for me. All right, guys. So we're taking over here. But yeah, I like the Garcia ITD kind of. I like fight doesn't go more, though. You basically have two guys here who are going to come in here and swing to death. And Garcia possibly has a path where he could just kind of run through him on the mat. So yeah, I think that's a decent spot here. Moving on, we have So Woon Choi taking on Joshua Kulabau. It's kind of a weird fight, but it's one that could potentially be high action depending, what kind of game Kulabau brings out here. I obviously, the line's Choi minus 230, Kulabau plus 190. I think it's about right. Choi, obviously, he's a boxer, really. He hits very hard. He's a very technical boxer. We saw him knock out Julian Erosa. He looked pretty good against Yusuf Zalal. I guess he's a competent grappler if you don't have very good jiu-jitsu. Obviously, we saw him get tapped out by Alex Teixeira 2 fights ago, and he was tapped out by Gavin Tucker as well, I believe, in his UFC debut. But he was actually able to consistently work up against Movsar Evloev, which was fairly impressive. On the other side, you got Kulabau, Kulabau's a weird guy because I don't actually skill-wise hate what he brings to the table. He has a decent amount of technical ability. He's a decent boxer and he's an okay grappler. He's got decent jiu-jitsu. He has decent entries on his takedowns. My issue with Kulabau is I just think he's kind of an athletic nothing, which is unfortunate because I do think he's skilled. He just doesn't really have, the athleticism to win fights, to put a stamp on fights in the UFC. And so in this fight, it's like, I do think on numbers it could be a close fight. I think it's going to be mostly standing. Kulabau, as I mentioned, he's a decent grappler, but I can't rate Kulabau's grappling considerably higher than Zalal's. And we saw Zalal just really kind of struggle with the strength and physicality of Choi in that fight, and I expect the same is going to happen here with Kulabau if he tries to grapple. And so I think it'll be mostly standing, which on the Kulabau side of things, I think that means for him to win this fight, he has to just put out a lot more volume than Choi, which is possible. But I do think Choi is going to walk him onto a lot of counters here, and Choi just hits a lot harder than him. So for Kulabau to win, he likely needs to win by a lot more volume, and I just don't really see that. I guess it's in play, but ultimately it's like he's fighting a better technical striker who also hits a lot harder and is just a much better athlete. So I think the line's right. What I do think is okay. I think doesn't go to distance at minus 120 is all right. I like the under at plus money. The truth of the matter is if Kulabau can't get off on his grappling here, I don't expect him to be able to have a ton of success, and I expect it to be fairly high volume, or at least Kulabau will try to force a high volume fight. We saw his fight with Charles Jourdain. He hurt Jourdain early in that fight, and that kind of devolved into a war where he got hurt as well. And I kind of expect the same here. You have Kulabau who has shown he can be a little susceptible to power shots, and you have Choi who can be hit. So I think the under is a decent look. I think volume could be higher than normal for a Choi fight. But yeah, I mean, I'm not passionate about it. This is probably the most meh fight on the entire card. Moving on, though, better fight here. We have Brendan Allen. He's taking on Jacob Malkoun. Very bizarre fight, if we're being completely honest. Brendan Allen, obviously a guy who came into the UFC with a fair bit of hype. He's won a number of UFC fights. I believe he's 5-2. His best win is probably Kevin Holland here. But he's largely disappointed, too, when he's taking steps up. I think it was 2 fights ago, he lost as a minus 400 favorite to Chris Curtis in a fight that really – and look, I'm a fan of Chris Curtis, but the reality is Chris Curtis is a journeyman who's not the best grappler in the world, and Brendan Allen didn't really try to grapple him much at all. He instead decided to bang it out and just kind of got just outboxed badly and eventually finished in that fight. We saw the same thing happen when he fought Sean Strickland, which was a significant step up, and it's probably the biggest one he's taken. He basically didn't wrestle at all, decided to box it out with Strickland, got finished in that fight. And that's just, for me, always going to be a significant concern with the Brendan Allen side of things. Allen he's a talented grappler. He's a very good submission grappler. He's an okay wrestler. He's a very, very good athlete. The problem is his fight IQ isn't the best, and on the feet, he is remarkably hittable. But those are things that I think, high level competition can capitalize on. Jacob Malkoun, I'm not so sure. It's funny because one of the first things I look at when I'm thinking about betting a fight is process. Does a fighter have a process that can consistently win minutes and win rounds? And Malkoun actually has that, shockingly. I think he's attempting 14 or 15 takedowns for 15 minutes, which is remarkable. The problem is, while those stats normally would be enough for me to back a lot of guys against a lot of guys they might be outskilled against, Malkoun is, again, we're talking about kind of similar to the Coolabah fight. He's an athletic nothing, number one, whereas Allen's a great athlete. I haven't seen a lot from him to suggest his jiu-jitsu is very good, even though he's allegedly Robert Whitaker's jiu-jitsu coach, which I find weird because, even when he has back control, even when Malkoun has back control, he doesn't put hooks in. He doesn't really try to take the back or attempt submissions. He prefers to try to wrestle ride guys. So that's kind of odd. And, striking wise, Malkoun's really got nothing there. And I think he's largely uncomfortable. We saw Phil Hawes put him out in 18 seconds. And I can't take a lot from that. Obviously, Hawes is an explosive striker and, he hits hard. So that is what it is. But in his last fight with AJ Dobson, you saw Malkoun couldn't get him down in round one very much, and he lost that round unanimously. And he just, I don't know, it's hard to explain. He seemed very tentative at space, and he didn't seem to really like getting hit, which isn't to say people like getting hit, but, it seemed like he was kind of afraid after the first couple times he felt, Dobson's power. That's like a huge, huge, huge concern for me going forward here with Malkoun. And in this particular matchup, it's like, I have Brendan Allen, a guy who's fought very high level competition. He's got 20 fights, and he's taken out a guy with 7 pro fights in Malkoun, who basically fought 4 bums on the Australian regional scene, outgrappled Razak Al-Hassan, and then beat a debutant who took a round off him and then gassed out. As much as I like Malkoun's process, it's just like for me to even have interest in him, I'd have to think he can not only get Allen down, but also out scramble him and shut down, Allen's jiu-jitsu. And I just don't see that. Honestly, on the feet, I think this is going to be badly one-way traffic. And even on the ground, I just struggle so badly to see, Jacob Malkoun wrestle riding Brendan Allen here. I kind of think he's going to get out scrambled and probably dominated. We saw Brendan Allen actually had a really fun fight with Anthony Hernandez in LFA, right before his debut. That went 5 rounds, and they were scrambling back and forth. And Fluffy is a much better grappler than Jacob Malkoun is. So, I mean, Allen at minus 300, I don't really love the price, but honestly, I understand why someone would take the shot there. In terms of props, I mean, honestly, Allen inside the distance is probably the best one here. It's plus 100. We've seen Malkoun doesn't really like to get hit. We've seen him get dusted by Phil Hawes. And I do think, if Allen out scrambles him, he probably has a chance to submit him. Plus, Allen throws very heavy ground and pound. The reason I would skew to the inside the distance over, say, KO is just because, Allen's the kind of guy where his jiu-jitsu is good enough that he could sub anybody if he's dominating. But with that being said, Allen could also choose to KO them. Over, I don't hate the over either, but to me, the problem is like I was leading the over as well. And my only concern with that is just on the Malkoun side of things. If Malkoun can consistently clinch this up, that's not a bad look. And actually, if you do prefer the Malkoun side of things here, Malkoun by decision is actually plus 800 on some books, although it looks like it may be coming down. But if you have Bet365, it's up at plus 900. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting look. I just struggle so hard to see Brendan or Jacob Malkoun hanging in the spot, to be honest. Moving on, though, we got Jack Della Maddalena, Ramazan Emeev. Guys, I broke this fight down earlier, so if you guys want to watch it or you're on the stream now, just scroll back and take a look at it. I'm not going to go through the entire thing again. The one prop I do like there, though, and I like it quite a bit, is Ramazan Emeev by decision. The reality is Emeev doesn't tend to finish people ever. He has a couple regional finishes against guys that aren't that good. I guess he could sub Jack here. As I mentioned, Jack does kind of, when he goes for subs off his back, put himself in positions to get sub. But I don't really think Emeev has the best squeeze ever, and I kind of think he's likely to prioritize control. So with that being the case, I like the Emeev by decision quite a bit in this spot. So and again, guys, if you're just joining the stream, I broke this down at length earlier. So go back and take a look. Moving on, though, we got Rogerio Bontorin. He is taking on Manel Kape. Interesting fight here. I actually have a bet on Bontorin. Kape's an interesting guy. It's funny because the takes I've seen on Kape, you would think a lot of the questions about Kape's grappling have been cleared up in his first 4 fights in the UFC. And it's funny because I faded Kape in his first few fights, primarily because there was a lot of very sketchy tape regionally with his grappling. If you guys go back and watch the Oka Sasaki fight, he got completely mauled there, got crucifixed, and eventually got finished on the mat. And I'm not sure he's answered those grappling questions. I will say Kape is very young. He's at a very good gym. He is getting better for sure. And so given his athleticism and his age, he is certainly it's within the realm of possible outcomes that he could have just gotten a lot better, both off his back and in terms of defending takedowns. But the reality is I haven't seen that question answered. For Kape, obviously he's an explosive athlete. He's a very good counterpuncher. He does have a tendency, though, to give away rounds on the feet unless you go crazy. We saw him let his hands go big against Zhalgas, but I think that had more to do with Zhalgas really going aggro and trying to take the fight to him than it did with some real change in process. His fight with Ode, very low volume. As I mentioned, I faded him because of the grappling questions, but in his first fight in the UFC, Pantoja didn't grapple at all, and Kape only attempted 91 strikes in 15 minutes in that fight, and basically just kind of gave away low volume decision. Next fight with Nicolau, the same thing happened. Nicolau did try to grapple him a bit, and I believe he got 4 minutes of control in that fight. But, the round 3 of that fight, Kape just lost it because he didn't do enough. That's the reality. And for me, until I see a more consistent, version of Kape and Kape pumping volume, it's going to be something that I'm going to have a concern for. In regards to this fight, though, I don't think Kape should have much trouble on the feet at all, really. Even if it's a low volume affair, Bontorin just defends strikes really poorly. I believe he defends them at like 50%. So Kape should be able to land hard and clean like a lot if they're striking. But again, the thing for me is I just kind of think, Kape is. What questions has he answered grappling? Okay, he defended 7 of 9 takedowns against Nicolau, but the truth is Nicolau, he's an okay wrestler and he's a very good grappler from top position, but he is kind of weak, and I don't think he has a lot of burst to him. And so, not that it was playing into Kape's hands at all, but I think it's a bit different than here, where you have a guy like Bontorin. Yes, Bontorin has very bad striking defense, and his grappling defensively is not great, but Bontorin is very, very strong. He has a lot of burst on his takedowns. And actually, when he gets on top, he has a decent control game. He's very heavy in top position, and he also has a very, very, very strong back take. And so, look, am I saying I favor Bontorin to win? No, I don't. And I only have a small bet on him. But I do think if you're looking at this fight, you have to be very, very certain that Kape can stuff the takedowns here, keep this a distance, and consistently win exchanges in a big way to win this fight, to bet him here. And I just don't see how you can get there. He's defended 2 of 9 takedown attempts against him in the UFC, and they were in one fight. If he comes out here, sprawls and brawls easily, then I'll be very impressed. And I'm not saying it can't happen. Again, he's young and he could make improvements, but I still think, he has a lot to prove there. He hasn't answered those questions yet. Prop-wise, the stuff that I think is interesting here, it's actually a lot of stuff that I think is interesting. It's kind of against the grain a tad, but on the Kape side of things, I actually think Kape by decision is a decent look at plus 250. As I mentioned, he isn't Kape will let his hands go if you take the fight to him because he is a counterpuncher. But if Bontorin doesn't take the fight to him on the feet, and Bontorin not usually a guy who throws heavy amounts of volume on the feet, then Kape's kind of happy to just pick his shots, counter him, and pick him off. And if that happens, he could hurt Bontorin and put him out. But again, you have to remember it's men's 125 pounds, right? So from that perspective, it's hard to say a finish from the Kape side is more likely than not. And I honestly think Kape looking his price means he's likely winning by decision more often than not. So plus 250, I think, is an okay look. I think on the Bontorin side, Bontorin by submission at plus 500 is a really good look because, look, the bottom line is if Bontorin is going to be the side here, he is likely going to have big success grappling. And if he has big success grappling, I shouldn't say he will submit him, but he'll have a very good chance to submit him. Like, if you tell me Bontorin gets 7.5 minutes of control in this fight, he likely has a very strong chance to win this fight by submission. And so, given that I like the Bontorin side of the fight, I think plus 500 on Bontorin is pretty solid. Moving on, we got a rematch. One of my all-time most painful moments. I bet Joanna Jędrzejczyk huge against Weili Zhang in their first matchup. Obviously, it did not go my way. And, I think unsurprisingly, given the nature of the first fight, I'm going back to the well here on Joanna. I have a bet on her around plus 150. Look, I mean, I saw, Technical Tim posted this on Twitter this week, and I thought it was pretty appropriate that he thinks Weili Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk likely go to decision probably at a higher percentage than any other pairing in the entire UFC. And that's probably true, because the truth is they're both very high volume fighters. Zhang has basically no grappling upside here. Maybe she could get a takedown, but, Joanna's probably the best defensive grappler in WMMA history. And on the Joanna side of things, in theory, she has grappling upside, given what we saw from Zhang on her back against Rose. But I think we all know Joanna at this point. She's not going to attempt takedowns, right? And so what you're likely to have, I think the most likely scenario is another very close, bang it out, high volume fight between these two women that is very, very close, where the margins are going to be very thin. If you go back and look at the first fight, Zhang won the fight, but she actually didn't win a single round unanimously. And I think that kind of speaks to the kind of fight we're looking at here. And I do like Joanna, because I think if you watch that fight, Joanna, when she wasn't brawling in the pocket, actually did a very good job when she countered to picking Zhang off. And when they were clinched up, Joanna dominated her in the clinch in that fight. And so I think, when you talk about scope of winning, I think the most likely outcome for either woman is a very close win. But I do think if Joanna fought to a more coherent game plan, I do think she has more upside in this spot. The problem is, Joanna's pretty reliable to fight how she fights. She's going to take the fight to Zhang, and Zhang's going to take the fight to her. I wish my bet's only small on Joanna because of that. If I knew Joanna would come out and grapple, or would come out and just pursue the clinch heavily, or just try to come out, point, fight, and counter, I'd be very inclined to take her. But with that being the case, though, I think the most likely scenario is I'm not saying we'll get as good a fight as the first one, but I think we'll have a similar fight in that both women will land many, many strikes. And, the margins will be close. You'll probably have a lot of people saying either fighter won. So with that being the case, I actually do like a prop here quite a bit. I bet it myself. I like Joanna by decision at plus 200. I'm not saying she couldn't win my finish. I guess she could, but Joanna has, I think, only one finish in the UFC. Her winning by finish here seems like a remarkably unlikely outcome. So I like her side by finish. Locke's favorite prop on the other side is I like Joanna by decision at plus 200. And on the other side of things, Locke likes Zhang by decision. And honestly, I think both are pretty good looks if you like that side of the fight. I also think, and I've talked to a couple people who like this, and I kind of like it myself, if you wanted to play it a little on the safer side, well, it's kind of gone now. I was going to say the over 2.5, but that's getting up near minus 300. I'd probably pass on that. But goes the distance. FanDuel's got minus 220 if you guys are interested in that. Obviously, Zhang theoretically could KO her, but the truth is, I think Joanna's chin issues were very overstated post the first Rose fight. If you rewatch the second fight, she ate some absolute howitzers in that fight and looked fine. She ate some howitzers from Zhang in the last fight and looked fine. I honestly think this is going the distance at like a 75 to 80% clip. So I like goes the distance a lot here at the minus 220 ring, and I like Joanna by decision quite a bit. And again, if you like the Zhang side, I don't personally, but if you do, I think Zhang by decision is fine as well. Moving on, though, we have another female fight here, Valentina Shevchenko. She is taking on Taila Santos, and I think this is a fascinating fight for a lot of reasons. But on paper, Taila Santos has some tools that could theoretically give Valentina Shevchenko some issues here. we saw Shevchenko, obviously, and I think this would be talked about the most by people who like the Santos side, is that she got held down for a round by Jennifer Maia, and she got controlled for about 9 minutes in that fight. She has control of the fence for a while. She was controlled on the mat. And if I'm being honest, I do think there are some concerns about Valentina's bottom game. If you were to go back even before that fight, go back to Valentina's fight, ages ago against Juliana Pena, I believe she lost the first round of that fight. But I don't remember how it was scored, but either way, both the first round and second round, she got put on her back, she got controlled there, and she eventually won the fight by armbar, but she didn't really show much of a coherent get-up game. She seemed pretty happy to play from her back. And so I shouldn't say that's a concern for me going forward. It's obviously not. She's one of the best fighters in the world. Her takedown defense is elite. She's elite in the clinch. But in theory, that's Santos' best way to win this fight. Santos obviously very strong herself. She's very tough in the clinch, and she averages over 2 takedowns for 15 minutes. So in theory, again, Santos could theoretically get significant amounts of top time here. In the striking, I think Valentina is a much cleaner technical striker. She's a better counterpuncher. She's a lot faster. But Valentina tends to be fairly low volume. And so while she's faster and more technical, Santos isn't a bad boxer, and she also hits very hard. And so you could have margins that end up being pretty thin there. But ultimately, that's the case that I'm making for Santos here. The reality is, I actually pre-tape here was kind of interested in Santos, but you go back and it's like, I know people chalk it up to her debut, but it is so hard for me to watch Santos against Mara Borella and really think, she has a coherent chance here. Now, if she comes out and beats up Valentina Shevchenko and wins the grappling, I will happily say, that was her UFC debut, whatever, throw it aside. But the truth of the matter is, she got out-grappled by Mara Borella, who is not a good fighter, nor is she a particularly great grappler. Past that fight, she beat up Molly McCann really bad, but okay, who cares? She out-grappled Jillian Robertson, but really, that fight, Jillian basically just kept trying to pull guard and get her with arm bars. And what Santos did show, which, is not meaningful, is that she could, float on top, and she did a good job, fighting submissions on top. But also, it's kind of a meaningless result in comparison to this fight. Then she fought Roxanne Modafferi, and again, Santos got 8 minutes of control in that fight. She won fairly easily. But like Roxanne fights tend to be fairly binary affairs where if Roxanne can't get her grappling going and she's not as strong as her opponent, she doesn't really have many outs there. And so, again, Santos' grappling looked good. She looked good in the clinch in that fight. But again, I don't really know what to take from that in relation to this fight. Like Roxanne Modafferi, Jillian Robertson, Molly McCann, Valentina Shevchenko. And then she fought Joanne Calderwood last fight. And frankly, she looked quite good. And look, Joanne Calderwood is a pretty good striker. She throws a lot of volume. She has a good Muay Thai game, good front kick. And Santos went right through her. She dropped her twice and eventually submitted her. It was very impressive. But again, it's like hasn't shown me the skills that I think she needs to beat Valentina against competition where I'd particularly rate it. If she came out there and fought Chikagi and mauled her, I would really, really be very impressed with that. Same thing even with like a Jennifer Maia, frankly, but she hasn't done that. She's basically beaten up kind of low-hanging fruit. Now, does that mean she can't come out here and do that to Valentina? No, it doesn't mean that. She could. Again, I'm not saying she can't, but the truth is, look, I lit my money on fire and I bet Andrade against Valentina because I watched that Maia fight and I was like, Jessica Andrade is really strong. She does a lot of the stuff Maia did. And Valentina absolutely mauled her in the grappling. And again, not to MMA math it, but it's like I'm very confident Jessica Andrade is stronger than Mara Borella is. And if Valentina mauled her like that, what's going to happen here? And I'm not saying it's a lock. Again, there is a chance that that's a one-off, but I cannot watch that fight and think, that Tyler Santos is going to come out here and out-grapple Valentina Shevchenko. I just can't. And guys, you know me. I love throwing darts at dogs. I personally don't see it. In terms of props, I'm with Bach here, to be honest. I love the over 3.5. I'm playing that myself. The thing is, Valentina could finish her, yeah, but I think Santos is very durable. She's only lost one fight in her career, and it was the Borella fight. She didn't get finished. I believe she's a black belt. If Valentina does get her wrestling going, she could just ride her out on top for 25 minutes. I really don't think she's very likely to sub her, and I don't think she's likely to get a mounted crucifix the way she did against Chuk. It's obviously you're always playing with fire, betting against Valentina finishing a fight, but I don't know. I do think Santos has, the physical attributes and, the jiu-jitsu attributes to likely avoid getting finished here. The bigger concern for that would just be Santos's cardio, but so far we haven't really seen much to suggest, that's a big issue. So I love the over here. And if you really, if you want to degen out a bit more and take a side, Shevchenko decision is currently sitting at, what do we got here? Even money. I don't really love even money. I'd rather just bet the over. Although even money is not bad again. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are hyped for this. I just don't really think Tyler Santos is it. But again, like I said, on paper, she does have the tools that could trouble Shevchenko. I'm just not really sold that her performances against, Jillian Robertson, Roxanne Modafferi, and Molly McCann are really at all relevant to this fight. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm excited for it. It would be cool to see Valentina lose, if for no other reason than to actually have some competition in the top 5. But it's all moot anyway. Everybody's playing for second when Tatiana Suarez comes back. So we will see. And with that, we move to the main event. We got my boy, Glover Teixeira. He's been probably my biggest cash train in my life. I've bet him in every fight on this run. I believe he's been a dog or maybe just slight favorite to Krylov, but on every fight on this run, taking on probably the most fun guy, 205 pounds, in Jiri Prochazka. And, the truth is, I faded Jiri in his last fight. It obviously didn't go very well. And honestly, there are aspects of Jiri's game that I truly hate, but he is very fun. And honestly, with 205 being as boring as it is, a guy like Jiri being champion would be really, really cool for the UFC. And so, with that being the case, though, when you look at this fight, it's very weird. And I am really kind of getting eaten up inside about what to do here. Obviously, as I mentioned, I've been on Glover on this entire run. And on paper, I don't think this is a bad fight for him. Prochazka, he's minus 200 here. But if you look at his tape, when he has been taken down, he's looked really, really poor off of his back. He's been submitted before. If you look at his last fight with Dominic Reyes took him down about 2 minutes into that fight, basically mounted him immediately. Reyes just not really a very good grappler, and so he was able to kind of explode out of it. But it was a position that if Teixeira gets it against him, he's going to absolutely dominate him from there. And so with that in mind, the obvious thing to say is, well, Glover's obviously the side at plus 170, right? But again, I'm not really so sure. Like, I'm thinking about it, and like if it gets over plus 200, I'd probably poke it. But on the other side, something I really just can't get past with the Teixeira side of things that just I keep coming back to. So if you look at this entire run that Teixeira has been on, this 6-fight run, it starts with Karl Roberson. Now that fight, Glover goes for a takedown, almost gets finished from elbows, eventually manages to recover, get top position, and finish the fight. Takes on young Cutelaba. Cutelaba hurts him bad in round 1, goes off, doesn't almost get a finish, but put the fear of God into him. Again, no one is saying Cutelaba is coming for the title. Eventually, Cutelaba gasses out, Glover takes over, wins the fight. Anthony Smith, 3 fights ago. Anthony Smith, a guy who has 0 takedown defense. Like, Jiri's takedown defense is probably better than Anthony Smith's. He comes forward for about 7 minutes and just unloads hell on Glover, just landing 1-2s constantly, pressuring. Locke, how are you?
I've been watching this stream from my laptop for the last 10 minutes and it hasn't dropped. How do I sound?
Okay. You sound good.
Okay. I think we might have remedied it, but continue. Finish your breakdown and then I'll get into mine as long as my audio holds up. Go for it.
But yeah, so Smith, he goes forward. He lands on Glover pretty much constantly in that fight. Eventually, Glover catches him and hurts him bad, and then he gasses out. Glover takes over and wins. Thiago Santos fight, 2 fights ago. Glover mostly dominates this fight. He gets 4 takedowns across the fight en route to finishing him. But in round 1, he gets hurt bad before he gets the takedown. And then again, in round 4, he gets dropped again in that fight. Santos landed 40 significant strikes despite being controlled for most of the fight. Obviously, last fight he dominated. But like the point that I'm trying to illustrate here is Glover has given up significant offense to 4 of his last 6 opponents on the streak. He's been nearly finished by a handful of them. And so even though I think Glover's a solid wrestler, like we're not talking about a wrestler on the level of Corey Anderson. And I do think with Jiri, Jiri's a guy who is like Anthony Smith. He's going to go forward and he's going to throw hammers at Glover early in this fight. Like Glover is not a guy who's hitting reactive takedowns to get the fight down. He's got to pressure, use his head movement, use his high guard to try to get inside. And so I think there's going to be ample opportunities for Jiri to put him out here. Does that mean he should be minus 200? No, I don't think he should be minus 200. But I'm also not sure, even with the huge grappling gap here, that Glover should be like evens either, because the reality is Glover's getting hurt over and over, and Jiri is a huge hitter. And I can't help but think if he gets off the level of offense that like an Anthony Smith got off or a Thiago Santos got off, he's going to finish him here. And so ultimately, like I would make Jiri small. Also, you have to factor in Glover's 42 years old, right? At some point, he's going to go over a cliff. And so I kind of think Jiri should be a slight favorite. I'm watching the line. If it goes to plus 200, I will take a small poke at Glover just because the reality is if he gets on top of Jiri, I think he's going to fucking wreck him in this fight. In terms of props, look, I like the under 2.5 here. It's juicy, but I think it's worth playing. I really like to share it by submission at plus 350, plus 380 on FanDuel if you have that book, because I think that's how he wins the fight if he gets it. And honestly, I really like Prochazka in round 1. It's plus 200. Actually, all the way up to plus 270 at FanDuel as well if you have that. And I think, that's going to be the most likely place that he wins this fight. Manpreet, what do you think? Block is gone. Okay. Yeah. So that's what I like tonight or this weekend. I think it's going to be an exciting card. With that, we're going to jump into, what we think are, the best props of this card. My 3 favorite props of this card, personally, I can't speak right now. Personally are Jake Matthews by decision plus 240. As I mentioned, I think Matthews should be a favorite here. I think the line's a bit disrespectful, but also I just don't think Matthews is a reliable finisher. He's not a huge hitter, and I don't really trust his positional jiu-jitsu. So I like him by decision quite a bit. I like Ramazan Emeev by decision plus 240. Again, I have Emeev capped at about 55 to 60% in this spot. I think Della Maddalena is an intriguing prospect, but the truth of the matter is, he's shown some real liabilities on the mat, and I think Emeev's going to get takedowns here. Plus, Emeev should be able to, he should be able to hold him down. But either way, I think if Emeev wins, he doesn't finish anybody really. I do think Della should be able to survive on bottom, especially since Emeev doesn't throw much ground and pound. So, I think Emeev decision is close to 40% here, whereas at plus 240, you're getting about a 30% implied. And then ultimately, the last one I have is Joanna Jędrzejczyk by decision plus 200. Again, this is pretty straightforward. I think this is a pick'em fight. I think it's a very, very close fight that I shouldn't say likely to end in split decision, but has a very high potential to do it. I like Joanna on the money line, and I think the plus 200 I give for very, very small chance of winning this fight by finish. So, yeah, those are the props that I like. Manpreet, if you're watching, he's been dropping his picks throughout. So if you guys want to just scroll back and see them, you can. But yeah, guys, so that's what I got this weekend. For all of you guys, good luck. I wish everybody the best of luck here. Go Jake Matthews, go Ramazan Emeev. Thank you to Manpreet for having me on here. It's unfortunate that we were not able to do this together. I hope I held it together for you guys okay. But anyway, guys, good luck this weekend. If you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. Manpreet's like the hardest working guy in the sport. The guy comes out here week in, week out, and just grinds it for everybody. Didn't work out tonight, but I'm sure it's going to next week. Again, guys, take it easy. Good luck on your bets. Peace.